All right, we are live here. Let's go right into our Google Slides for today. So I'm not going to turn it on its side today because for some reason whenever I go into that presentation mode, it acts goofy. So we're just going to go through it like this. Your young eyes are good enough to read stuff up close. So economic effects of Reconstruction. Here we go. Let's talk about this. You'll see Hawk Focus 34 here. You'll need to read pages 192 and 193 on the online textbook discussing a new system of labor. And something that I've noticed you guys are all asking me about this online textbook, and where's it at? It's in the same place it's been since August. I showed you how to use it like on the first day of school. Put the hyperlink in there for you. Put the username, password. It's right there on the Google Classroom course stream. It's been there for like 7 months. So please use it. Please use it. Let's see. Let's get right on into our lesson note. I want to keep this to 10 minutes. So, economic effects of Reconstruction. And this picture that you see here in the background is actually Columbia, South Carolina, after General Sherman had burned it down, and now we got to rebuild, right? So, got to continue talking about Reconstruction efforts and how is South Carolina going to make this happen. So our state standard and indicator for today is 8.5, indicator 2, where we need to describe the economic impact of Reconstruction on South Carolinians in each of the various social classes. All right, we're moving along pretty good. So let's discuss plantations after the war. Plantation owners lost a large part of their wealth as well as their labor. So think about it. You own all this property, and you own all these slaves. Well, your slaves are now set free, and your property's probably been burned down and destroyed. So, man, life's pretty tough. So it's kind of a sad situation for them, even though it's a positive thing that the slaves are set free. However, they go back and forth with one another. Some of the owners were upset that their slaves left, and as a result were pretty hostile to the freedmen. So it kind of was still a negative for a lot of the former slaves that were set free, just because of the way that they had ended up being treated as a result. And a lot of people placed blame on them, unfortunately. So plantations after the war. Because plantation owners could not work on the farm alone, think about this. How are you going to work a 1,000-acre farm with you, your wife, and 2 kids? Like, it's not going to happen. So we had to turn to a different society, right, here in the South, that was no longer slave, but one of sharecropping. Let's talk about that. So landowners would contract with a farm worker to work their land in return for things like a house, some tools, seed, and fertilizer. And then at the end of the year, the tenant would get a fraction of the profits. So it's like, hey, I'll give you a little bit of money, a roof over your head, and what you need to farm, as long as you'll farm my farm. So you had a couple tenant farmers living on your plantation, boom, taken care of. Person who owns it's almost like leasing a field, if that makes sense. You get to lease a field to work on it to survive, but the person who owns the field still gets most of the profit. And that's how it went for a while with this sharecropping and tenant farmers. So small farmers did not own these slaves before. So let's talk about small farmers before the Civil War. These are poor whites that didn't own slaves to begin with. And so they weren't directly affected by the 13th Amendment because, well, they didn't have any slaves to lose. But now with a massive influx, means a huge increase in the amount of farmers that are living in the South, they had to compete with these newly freed African-American sharecroppers when they sold their crops at market. So think about how difficult this is. The market becomes flooded. If there was 20 small farmers in your county, now there's 100, or 120, and you're all competing. So this made a lot of the poor farmers kind of go broke. And you remember we talked about the free soil movement earlier during the antebellum period. These are those same people, those poor white farmers that already were trying to compete with plantation owners. Now they're trying to compete with plantation owners and sharecroppers and tenant farmers. And so it really made things pretty bad for them. So let's talk about these people that saw opportunities in a new government. You've got small farmers that said, hey, you know what, instead of playing this game, I'm going to try and, run up the run up the political and social class elite scale as quickly and easily as possible. And they were called Scalawags most often. A scalawag, kind of a negative connotation. You'll learn more about it in your book. We've got freedmen after the war, the Freedmen's Bureau. We already talked about them yesterday, but we need to also understand they helped reunite a lot of families that had been separated. Sometimes when you were in slavery, your wife or husband or mother or father or daughter or son could be sold away from you, and you'd lose track of your family members. And the Freedmen's Bureau tried to help reunite these people. African Americans also built their own churches, and the Freedmen's Bureau helped. And that's an important part of history here in South Carolina is churches and worship. And there's a lot of these that are marked as historical sites still to this day too. So let's talk about what we ended up having to do. So a lot of freedmen had to move back to their former plantations and act as a sharecropper. And then the sharecropping cycle made African Americans economically dependent on the landowners. So you're not a slave, but you still are forced to live on their property, abide by their rules, and basically work for them in order to survive. So you're not a slave. You're like a voluntary servant. It's kind of what it is. African Americans also suffered from white violence after the war. So since a lot of these people began to blame them for the negative outcome, this vigilante justice and mistreatment would occur, and groups like the KKK would take this violence out on those people groups. So let's talk about the ladies. Ladies after the war. For elite women, they had to learn how to do household tasks. So they used to be the head mistress of the plantation. Well, now, guess what? You're doing the laundry, you're doing the cooking, you're doing everything. So women had to really step up to do these household tasks because they did not have house slaves anymore. And because of the number of men that were injured and killed during the war, a lot of them had become widowed or singled, and they began to take on unconventional jobs for women. They had to start doing more of like men's work. So it was pretty tough on them. So, carpetbaggers and scalawags petitioned for women's rights. So you got a lot of Northerners coming down, trying to overturn Southern society on its head, and trying to get women into positions of power and authority and allowing them to be able to hold property, own property, and vote in the new state constitution. So a lot of women's suffrage movement occurred. Now, they wouldn't see the full fruits of this until the 20th century in the 1900s. And it took a while for it to really stick, but you kind of see the surge right here post-Civil War in the 1870s with women's rights coming to the forefront of people's minds. All right, Northerners in the South, this is the real carpetbaggers. All right, carpetbaggers. They would come as teachers and missionaries to preach the gospel and entrepreneurs for business purposes. And you can see this illustration on the right-hand side. You've got a carpetbagger he's riding on top of a carpet bag on top of a Southerner, taking advantage of them. And you see all the destruction in the background, and he comes riding in proud with his carpet bag. And it's sort of a derogatory term because you have this bag that was literally made of a rug and then sewed up to be a bag because you were poor, and then you're going to come down here and act like you're royalty. And they participated in the radical governments, and they sought economic opportunities in the South. So they said, hey, if I can't make it in the North, I'll come take advantage of what just happened in the South. And Southerners really kind of hated that. So that's basically our lesson for today. Look over these. I've already posted the slides for you in Classroom under the lesson content area where all the slides will be posted. So please do that, review it there, watch this video, read the pages in the book to do the Hawk Focus, and then I posted a flip grid. You should be able to log in using your Google. Yes, I know the flip grid says 1A, but I just created one of them instead of making 6 of them, so all of you can do it in one place and I can see all of your work. All right, so whenever you make a video response, follow the instructions, make the video response. It needs to be right at 2 minutes, and talk about the 3 major takeaways that you got from today's lesson, from reading and doing the work in the Hawk Focus, from